Sola woke with the taste of expensive whiskey on her lips, the heavy scent of cigar smoke in the air, and the cold touch of silk sheets wrapped around her body. She couldn't remember how she had ended up in the CEO's bedroom, but she remembered the darkness of his office the night before. How he had laughed and pulled her to his side when she tried to clean the conference table, how his breath had reeked of alcohol, and how she had said yes when he invited her to celebrate her ambition.
We shouldn't be doing
that
this.
night, the world had spun
Someone could
between
walk
power
in.
and desperation. And now, the daylight was breaking with the weight of truth. She wasn't
We
just the
shouldn't be
cleaner
doing this.
anymore. She was the woman
Someone
who
could
had
walk
spent the
in.
night with the CEO. One mistake that could end the lives of both the powerful and the powerless. The CEO woke beside her, blinking as though he had just risen from the dead, rubbing his eyes. "What have we done, Sola?" he muttered, his voice thick with regret. The shame was creeping in. His words were weak, but his position in the company still gave him power. He adjusted his shirt and stared out the window, avoiding her gaze. Sola didn't answer. She just sat up, wrapping herself in the discarded sheet and staring at the room around her expensive leather chairs. A mahogany desk and a large bed that felt like a prison now. She had climbed too high, too fast. For what? To be caught in this moment. Before she could gather her thoughts, the door burst open. The head of security stood there, his face a mixture of disbelief and fury. "Mr. Olenka, the board is waiting. They've heard the news." He didn't speak to Sola. She was invisible now, just a shadow in the CEO's world. "News." Sola's voice cut through the tension like a sharp knife. "What news?" "Don't worry about it," the CEO muttered, shooing the security guard out of the room. But Sola was already standing up, her feet planting firmly on the cold marble floor. She knew exactly what the news was. It was the same kind of news that spread through gossip, through whispers in the hallways. The kind of news that the world would judge her by long before they asked for the truth. Her heart beat faster as she dressed in the clothes she had been wearing when the night began, her plain cleaning uniform, the one that never allowed her to be seen as more than the woman who mopped the floors. She adjusted her collar, watching as the CEO put on his expensive suit with the same careless movements. The silence between them stretched long enough that it felt like the walls were closing in on her. Sola spoke first, her voice shaking, but clear. "This isn't about me. This is about what happens next." He turned to face her, his expression one of frustration and confusion. "What happens next? You think this will end well for you?" "For me." Sola laughed bitterly. "No, for us. You, me, all of us. There's a bigger story here. Your power, my ambition, everything got tangled up in one mistake. You're not the only one who's going to pay." Sola pushed past him, not caring if he followed or not. She marched out of the room and down the hall, where the rest of the board members were already gathering, whispering. They had seen the headlines. The CEO and a cleaner. It would be the scandal of the century. The doors to the conference room swung open, and the board members froze, their eyes on her. It wasn't often a cleaner made her way into this room, let alone one who had spent the night in the CEO's bed. The whispers grew louder. The CEO followed behind her, his voice booming. "This is an internal matter. Everyone, sit. Sola, please, take a seat." Sola stood still, her heart racing. "No, Olenka, I will not sit. Not until I speak the truth." The board members shifted uncomfortably. The head of HR cleared his throat. "Mr. Olenka, we should discuss this privately." But Sola was already speaking. "I spent 10 years cleaning floors in this building. 10 years. And no one ever cared who I was. No one ever cared if I was invisible. As long as I kept the offices clean, the windows spotless. But last night, I became someone. I became someone in your eyes, Olenka. Not because I earned it, but because I was willing to step into a place I didn't belong." She looked at the board members, her voice steady but powerful. "I am not the only one who has been invisible here. I am not the only one who's been walking around, pretending to matter while everyone else climbed over me, under me, around me. But last night, for one night, I climbed too." The CEO's face grew red. "Enough, Sola. This is about a mistake, a private matter." "No, Olenka," Sola said, stepping closer to him. "This is about ambition. My ambition, your ambition. We both stepped outside the lines. We both got caught." The room was silent now. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, avoiding eye contact with her. The weight of her words hung in the air like a storm cloud, ready to burst. Finally, one of the older board members, a man whose face was lined with years of decisions, spoke up. "What do you want from us, Sala?" She turned to him, meeting his gaze. "I want to know how far this company is willing to go to protect its own. I want to know if it will turn its back on someone like me, just because I dared to have ambition." The CEO's eyes narrowed. "This is not a time for questions, Sola." "I'm done being afraid of questions," she said, her voice rising now. "I've asked the world for opportunities, and it's given me nothing. But I won't be silenced anymore. I'll ask until the day I die." The tension in the room was unbearable. No one spoke for what felt like an eternity. Then, the union elder, who had worked at the company longer than most of the board members, stood up. His voice was quiet, but it held the weight of years of wisdom. "This is a matter that concerns us all. The problem is not just what happened last night, but what it represents. Ambition without community is like a house built on sand. It will fall when the wind blows." The room fell even quieter. Sola turned to the union elder. "Then we rebuild the house, together." The hall was heavy with the weight of silence, the kind that presses on your chest and steals your breath. Sola's words had echoed like thunder in the room, but they were no longer just words, they were the beginning of something larger. The board members shifted in their seats, each one afraid of the consequences. The CEO Olenka stood still, his face a mask of anger and shame, but underneath it, a seed of fear had been planted. "You cannot be serious," the head of HR said, breaking the stillness. His voice was sharp, as if the words had been biting at his tongue. "This cannot go any further. There are legal matters to consider. Discretion must be maintained." Sola turned to face him. "Age is cold. What's the point of discretion when the truth is already out?" she asked. "What's the point of covering up a lie when it is already breathing in the open air?" Olenka's face reddened. "This is a private matter, Sola. You're not in a position to make demands." But Sola didn't flinch. "I've been invisible for too long," she said, her voice steady. "But I won't be silent anymore, not when the truth demands to be heard." A murmur rippled through the board members, but no one dared speak. The union elder's words had struck a chord, and the room was now a battlefield. The question had been raised. Would ambition continue to drive one person to rise, or would the community hold the power to pull them back down? The board chair, an older man with graying hair, cleared his throat. "We cannot afford a scandal, especially one involving the company's top executive. What do you propose we do, Sola? You've made your case, but you're asking for the impossible." "I'm not asking for anything impossible," Sola replied, her voice unwavering. "I'm asking for fairness. I'm asking for the chance to be heard." The CEO stepped forward, his voice low, but filled with a dangerous edge. "You're making a mistake, Sola. This isn't just about you anymore. If this goes public, we'll sue fair. You don't understand the stakes." But Sola wasn't listening. She had heard the threats, the warnings, the fear in their voices. She had heard it all before, whispers in the hallways, insults behind closed doors. She had been nothing but a cleaner, a faceless figure to be ordered around, until now. Now she had power, and it was more than she had ever dreamed of. "I understand more than you think," she said, her eyes meeting Olenka's. "I understand that I've been a part of this system, but no one has ever asked me if I wanted to be part of it. No one has ever asked the cleaners, the drivers, the people who keep this place running, what they think." There was a brief pause, and then a voice from the back of the room spoke up. "She's right. We've never been asked." It was one of the cleaners who had worked with Sola for years. Her name was Titi, and she was known for being quiet, never drawing attention to herself. But now, she stood tall, her words carrying a weight that made the room shift. "The company doesn't care about us," Titi continued, her voice clear. "We clean the floors, wash the windows, and no one notices. We're just ghosts here. But when something like this happens, suddenly we matter." The room was stunned into silence. No one had expected the workers to speak out, especially not Tita, who had always kept to herself. But now, her words hung in the air, like a challenge. Sola nodded at her, a sense of solidarity building between them. "We matter," she said, turning back to the board. "All of us. We are the backbone of this company, and until we're treated like human beings, this place will never truly succeed." The CEO's face darkened, and he took a step toward her, his voice rising. "You think you can hold this company hostage with your moral high ground? You have no idea what you're dealing with. The consequences of this will be more than you can handle." But Sola stood firm, her eyes never leaving his. "The consequences of keeping the truth buried will be worse. You've built this empire on the backs of people like me. Now, you will either face the truth or let it destroy everything you've worked for." The board members shifted uneasily, their loyalty to the CEO wavering in the face of Sola's words. They knew that if this went public, the company's reputation would be in shambles. But they also knew that the tide was turning. People were tired of being silenced, tired of living in fear of losing their jobs, their dignity. Something had to change. A low voice spoke from the back of the room, one of the senior accountants. "What are we going to do about the workers? The cleaners? The drivers? They're all watching. If we ignore this now, it will spread like wildfire." The CEO's jaw tightened. "We deal with it quietly. We make it go away." Sola shook her head. "You can't make this go away, Alanka. You can't bury the truth again. It's out, and it's alive." The room fell silent again. But this time, it wasn't just the weight of the board members' fear. It was the weight of the workers' voices, rising up together in defiance. "Enough," the board chair finally said, his voice cutting through the tension. "We will take a vote. We will decide how to proceed." The board members nodded, but the union elder, who had been quiet until now, stood up. His voice was calm but powerful. "This isn't a matter of voting, Chairman. This is a matter of justice, and justice cannot be decided by a boardroom full of men who have never known what it's like to work for their daily bread." Sola turned to the elder, a sense of gratitude flooding her chest. "Thank you," she said softly. The board chair hesitated, then nodded. "We will reconvene tomorrow to discuss the next steps. Until then, no more public statements. No more questions." But as the board members filed out of the room, their whispers following them, Sola knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Ambition had led her here, but it was the truth then, the community behind her, that would decide what happened next. The next day, the atmosphere in the office building was thick with rumors. Whispers swelled through the halls, the elevators, the break rooms, wherever people gathered. The scandal between the CEO and Sola had hit the streets before it even reached the boardroom, and now the company was on the brink of collapse. Investors were pulling out, employees were restless, and the workers, the cleaners, drivers, security had started to rally. Sola stood at the edge of the building's rooftop, watching as the city sprawled out beneath her. The sun had barely risen, casting a reddish glow across the horizon, but the warmth didn't touch her. She felt cold, as if the wind had taken everything she once knew and ripped it away, leaving her exposed. "Are you thinking of jumping?" Taiti asked, stepping up beside her, breaking her reverie. Sola didn't respond at first. She just stared at the city below, the sound of the street noise rising like a distant chant. "I'm not a coward," Sola finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't come here to back down, but I didn't think it would feel like this." Titi looked at her, her expression unreadable. "Like what? To be seen for the first time? To finally be heard?" Sola turned to face her. "No. To see how much it costs. I thought I could rise and leave everyone behind. But now everyone knows my name, and I don't know what to do with that." Tidy's eyes softened. "You're not alone in this. We all see you now. We all heard you, Sola. And that's why we're with you." Sola's eyes burned, but she forced back the tears. She hadn't realized how much she'd been holding on to until now, how much she had carried the weight of the invisibility, the silence. It was only now, when the truth had spilled out, that she realized how deeply it had hurt her and how much it had hurt all of them. As the morning wore on, Sola and Titi made their way down to the workers' assembly. It was crowded, filled with voices calling for action, for change. They had gathered outside the main entrance of the building, not just cleaners, but security, janitors, cooks, and even the delivery drivers. They had all come together, no longer willing to be invisible. The company had been built on their sweat, their hands, their time, and now it was time for them to take back what they had lost. Sola stepped up onto the makeshift platform, a wooden crate that someone had brought, and held up her hand. The crowd fell silent. "We've been quiet long enough," she began. Her voice was raw, but it carried. "For years, we've been told our voices don't matter. We've been told that our labor is only worth the crumbs we're given. But look at us now. Look at what we've done. We've shown them that we are not invisible. We are not a part of the company to be discarded or silenced when it's convenient." The crowd erupted into applause. The sound a wave of solidarity that echoed through the streets. Sola's heart swelled, but the weight of the moment pressed down harder. What did it all mean if they didn't act? Titi stepped beside her and added, "We are workers. We are the heartbeat of this place. Without us, they would have nothing. No clean floors, no food, no deliveries, nothing." Sola looked out over the crowd. The faces of people she had cleaned beside for years. She had spent so many years cleaning their floors, but now she was standing on their shoulders. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It was everyone's. "What do we want?" Sola shouted over the noise. "Justice," the crowd yelled back. "And what will we do to get it?" "Fight," came the chorus. Sola nodded. "And we fight not for just one of us. We fight for all of us. We fight to change the system that has ignored us for too long. We fight to make sure that this company remembers who it was built on. Not just the CEO, not just the investors, but us, the workers." The energy surged through the crowd, and for a moment, it felt like the ground itself was shaking beneath them. Sola knew this was just the beginning. She had opened a door, but the world on the other side was full of darkness. The road ahead would be hard. The battle would be long. But she wasn't alone anymore. She had the community behind her. Later that afternoon, the board reconvened. But it wasn't just a few corporate suits sitting in their usual seats. There were media representatives, a dozen union lawyers, and even workers from the building cleaners, drivers, and managers who had shown up to hold their ground. The CEO, Olenka, entered the room with a kind of weariness that only comes from a night of no sleep, his eyes bloodshot, his posture slumped. A black male, a powerful black man in his late 40s, with short-cropped black hair and a commanding presence, wearing an expensive, tailored business suit with a stressed expression. He addressed the room with a heavy sigh. "We can't keep this under control anymore. We've lost investors, and He stopped, a pause that felt longer than it was. "I don't know what to do." A lawyer from the union, a woman named Eotund, stood up. "You don't know what to do because you've been too focused on protecting your position to see the truth. You've built this empire on the backs of people who never had a voice, and now you want to sweep it all under the rug. You've failed them. You've failed all of us." Olenka's jaw clenched. "I didn't create this system. I inherited it. But you perpetuated it." Eotund shot back. "And now you must change it, or the system will collapse, and you'll be left with nothing." The room went quiet. The tension was palpable. No one wanted to face the truth of what Eotund had said. No one wanted to admit how deep the rot had gone. But the community had spoken, and it would not be silenced again. Sola stood in the back of the room, watching as the board members looked to each other, waiting for someone to take charge. But no one did. No one knew how to fix the mess they had created. They had thought their power was absolute, but the workers had shown them how fragile it truly was. A powerful black man in a tailored suit laughingly pulls a Hispanic female, a determined Hispanic woman in her early 30s, with long, dark hair tied back, wearing a simple blue cleaning uniform, with a slender build and intense eyes. And now, the question remained. Would the CEO and the board choose to fight for their own survival, or would they bend, hoost for onse, and do what was right? The days after the workers' rally blurred into a frantic whirl of negotiations, protests, and public outcry. The company was drowning in bad press. Everywhere the workers went, they carried signs, their voices shaking the air. Justice for all. The streets were filled with their cries, but even more so, they were filled with the uncertainty of what might come next. Sola felt it every time she looked at the headlines. The company's stock had dropped sharply. The CEO's reputation was in tatters, and the workers' demands were only growing louder, and they wouldn't stop until they got it. Inside the boardroom, Olenka sat at the head of the table, his hands pressed together in frustration. "This is not just a corporate scandal anymore. This is a war," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "If we don't act now, we will lose everything." A few were starting to whisper about resignations, while others were calculating their exits. The weight of the workers' revolt hung in the air like a storm. "We've tried to manage this internally, but nothing seems to work," said the head of marketing, his voice tinged with panic. "The public is enraged, the employees are restless, and the press won't let it go. We need a solution." "Fast!" said the CFO, who was rubbing his temples. "If we don't regain control of the narrative, investors will start pulling out. The entire workforce is watching us. The damage is already done, so we need to make a choice. Do we give them what they want, or do we risk everything?" It was Eotund, the union lawyer, who had been listening quietly in the corner. Her expression was calm, almost cold. "You have no choice, Olenka," she said. The room went silent at her words. Olenka turned toward her. His eyes narrowed. "And you think the workers will accept change, just like that? They won't be satisfied with a few promises. The workers don't want your promises. They want action. They want representation. They want power. You have ignored them for too long, and now they've realized their worth." Olenka exhaled sharply, running his hands through his hair. "Fine. Then what do we do?" "First, you admit you've failed them," Eotund replied, her voice unwavering. "Second, you offer them something real, a seat at the table, and you build a council, a body of workers and executives who will make decisions together, not in isolation." The room shifted uncomfortably. No one had ever proposed such a radical idea. Olenka looked at his board members, all of whom were now avoiding his gaze. The pressure mounted on him, each passing second threatening to break him. Finally, he spoke. "I'll make the call, but I want this settled fast. We can't afford to lose more time." Back in the Workers' Assembly Hall, Sola stood at the front of the room, her heart pounding. Sola knew this moment was crucial. "I know that many of you are wondering what will happen next," Sola began, her voice steady despite the anxiety gnawing at her stomach. "We have made our voices heard. We have shown them that we will no longer be invisible for our right to be seen. But today, we have an opportunity. The CEO and the board are talking about change. Real change. They are offering us a seat at the table." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "A seat at the table? One of the cleaners," named Namdi muttered, shaking his head. "They'll just use us to cover their backs when things go wrong." Sola nodded. "I understand your doubt, but we have to take this seriously. This could be the beginning of something bigger. If we don't sit at the table, we'll never have the chance to change the rules of the game. They've kept us out for so long because they think we're too small to make a difference. But if we're there, if we have a voice, we can shape the future." Another worker, a cook named Kahind, stood up. "But what if they only give us a seat to shut us up? What if this is just another trick?" "I don't know if it's a trick," Sola replied, "but I do know that if we don't take this chance, we may never get another. The world is watching. If we show them that we're willing to fight for our place, we will force them to respect us. And that's a fight worth having." The workers exchanged glances, and slowly they began to nod. The fear that had been so palpable earlier seemed to dissipate, replaced by a growing sense of purpose. The road ahead was uncertain, but the choice was clear. They would fight for their place, for their dignity, for the future. Later that day, Sola received the call. The board had agreed to their terms. They would create the council half executives, half workers, and begin discussions about real changes to the company's structure. It was a victory. But Sola knew that this was just the beginning. She had forced their hand, But now the real work would begin. As she walked out of the building that evening, she felt a sense of exhaustion settle in her bones. The battle wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. But for the first time in a long time, she could see a way forward. She had asked for justice. She had asked for a place at the table. And now, the workers had it. But what would they do with it? The Workers' Council had been established, and Sola was seated at the table. It was a modest conference room, one she had cleaned many times before, its windows facing the city's skyline. But now, as she sat at the head of the table, she felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. This room, once a place where decisions were made in silence, would now echo with the voices of those who had never been heard before. The CEO, Olenka, sat at the opposite end, his face tense, his hands steepled in front of him as he stared at the workers who filled the room. The board members were present as well, their expressions a mix of disdain and disbelief. They didn't believe in this. They didn't believe the workers had the right to be there, but they were trapped. The workers had already shown their power, and now they would see how much the company was willing to give. Sola glanced around the table, taking in the faces of the other workers who had been chosen to represent their departments. Namdi, the cleaner with the sharp eyes and steady hands, sat beside her. Titi, who had stood by her side from the beginning, was seated at the far end, her fingers tapping nervously on the tabletop. They were all here now, their fates intertwined with the decisions that would be made in this room. "This is your chance," Sola said, her voice low but firm. "Our chance. We cannot let them manipulate us again. They are not here to listen. They are here to control." Namdi gave her a sharp look. "You're sure they won't just try to placate us? Give us a seat at the table, but not the power to change anything." Sola nodded. "They've done it before. This time, we make sure they don't get away with it." The door to the room opened, and Olenka stood up, his eyes scanning the room, trying to meet the gaze of each worker. He cleared his throat before speaking. "Thank you all for joining us today," he began, his voice tight with the burden of his position. "We've decided that, in light of the recent events, it's time for the company to make some changes. Real changes. The workers have made their demands clear, and we are prepared to listen. But this is a partnership, a negotiation." His words were cold, calculated, like a businessman trying to convince his investors to hold steady. But Sola could hear the fear underneath his tone. He was fighting for his power, and he knew that if this went wrong, he would lose everything. "I know many of you believe this is a victory," Olenka continued, "but understand this. We are not here to give up control. We are here to find common ground. We are not going to make decisions based on emotions or rumors. We are going to build a better, stronger company." Sola's eyes narrowed. This isn't about building a stronger company. This is about fairness. It's about giving the workers the voice they've always deserved. "Olajinka, Stefan, we will discuss salaries, benefits, and working conditions. But we will not tolerate threats. We will not be bullied into decisions that threaten the future of this company." Sola leaned forward, her voice cutting through his words like a blade. "And we will not tolerate being treated like animals. You built this empire on the backs of the workers. Now, we want to share in that power. You want us to be partners? Then treat us like equals. No more tricks. No more manipulation." The board members shifted uneasily in their seats. Some looked down, avoiding eye contact with Sola. Others exchanged whispered words, the tension in the room thickening by the second. They were used to running things. Their way no questions asked. Now, the workers were standing up, demanding a seat at the table, and the tables had turned. Olenka's expression darkened, but before he could respond, Aotund, the union lawyer, spoke up. "Let me make one thing clear," she said, her voice carrying the weight of years of experience. "We are not here to be appeased. We are here to make real, lasting changes. If you think you can walk away from this and continue business as usual, you are gravely mistaken." The silence that followed was suffocating. The workers were no longer afraid. They were no longer the invisible laborers who scrubbed floors and cleaned offices, te werriere in this room, demanding their place in the decision-making process. And the more they spoke, the more the board's confidence began to erode. Olenka sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world was on him. He knew that he was losing control. He knew that his days as the undisputed leader of the company were numbered. "All right," he said finally, his voice begrudging. "We'll start with the basics. Fair wages, health benefits, work-life balance. But make no mistake, this is just the beginning. If we're going to do this, it needs to be a partnership, and that means compromise." Sola stood up her back straight, her eyes locked on Olenka's. "No, Olenka. This is not about compromise. This is about justice, and justice is non-negotiable." The tension in the room was thick enough to suffocate, but Sola knew they had reached a pivotal moment. The board was crumbling under the weight of their own greed. They had never imagined this day would come, when the workers would rise and demand their due. "We will not stop," Sola continued, her voice strong and unwavering. "We will not stop until we have a system that works for all of us, not just for the few at the top. We've been invisible for too long. We've been exploited for too long. Now we make sure this company reflects the values of every worker in it." The room fell silent again, the weight of Sola's words hanging heavy in the air. But this time, the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was a silence of realization. The battle for power was no longer just about money or control. It was about equality, respect, and dignity. And for the first time, Sola felt the power of a community standing behind her, standing with her. The workers were not just employees anymore. They were a force to be reckoned with. The meeting ended with no clear resolution, but the promise of future talks, of more negotiations. But Sola knew that the hardest part was still ahead. They had won the first battle, but the war was far from over. The company would try to push back. The executives would try to undermine them. But now, the workers had the tools they needed: unity, strength, and the courage to fight for what was right. As the workers filed out of the conference room, Sola turned to Titi and Namdi, who had stood by her side throughout the entire process. "We did it," Sola said, her voice barely above a whisper. Titi smiled, her eyes filled with pride. "We did it together." Namdi, his expression serious, nodded. "But the real work starts now." And Sola knew he was right. The hardest part of the fight was still to come. But this time, they wouldn't be silenced. They had come this far. Now, they would see it through to the end. The city had changed overnight. The streets that once thrummed with the rhythm of ordinary lives now pulsed with the energy of revolution. For days, protests continued outside the company headquarters. The workers, now united more than ever, rallied with banners and chants. The media swarmed, cameras flashing, their questions like daggers, aimed at the powerful elite inside. Every day, the company's stock fluctuated, with every new headline, each more damning than the last. Inside the boardroom, Olenka and his executives sat, their faces strained with exhaustion. The workers' demands had not been a fleeting moment. They had come to stay. The workers were not backing down, and the board knew this. No amount of money or influence could erase the tide of change that was coming. Sola paced the room, her hand resting on the back of the chair she had once cleaned. It was a strange feeling being in this space as an equal, not an outsider. But it was still a battlefield. The work was far from done. "We've come a long way, but the question remains," Sola said, breaking the silence. "What will you do now, Olenka? You've given us a seat at the table. Will you actually give us the power we need to make a real difference?" Olenka shifted uneasily in his seat. "I've given you a platform, but you can't expect me to just hand over control. This is a company. We still have to make decisions that will ensure its survival. We have responsibilities to shareholders, investors, and clients. And what about your responsibility to the people who built it?" Sola shot back, her voice hardening. "What about the people who've been invisible for so long that they forgot their own worth? You only ever saw us as labor to be used. Now, you'll have to see us as partners, as equals, whether you like it or not." There was a cold silence in the room. The tension hung like a cloud, thick and suffocating. Sola's words had struck a nerve. The workers were no longer asking for favors. They were demanding their rightful place. "You can't demand everything in one breath, Sola," one of the board members said, his tone dismissive. "We've agreed to give you some concessions, but you can't expect us to tear down the whole system just to satisfy you." "Maybe the system needs tearing down," Sola replied, her gaze unwavering. "Maybe this company, as it was, doesn't work anymore. If we want to survive, we have to build a new foundation, and that means real change, not Hoost's Band-Aid solutions." The room went quiet. The board members exchanged uncertain glances, but no one had the courage to challenge her directly. They knew that they had already lost so much. Sola had forced them into a corner they couldn't escape from. The workers weren't asking for a little piece of power. They were asking for a seat at the table, a voice in every decision that affected their lives. The final meeting was set for the following week. This would be the moment of reckoning, the culmination of the months of struggle. It was time to see if the board would truly accept the workers as partners, or if they would find some way to undermine the process. As the days passed, Sola's mind raced. She knew the stakes. She had seen what happened when power wasn't checked, when it was allowed to grow, unchecked, until it consumed everything in its path. She had seen it in the way Olenka treated the workers, in the way the board had turned a blind eye to their suffering. But she also knew that change was fragile. The workers were strong, but they needed to hold on to their unity. One mistake, one misstep, and the whole thing could collapse. The final meeting arrived, and the room was packed. Workers filled the seats alongside the eggs. This time, there were no airs of superiority. This time, there were no clear lines between the powerful and the powerless. This time, it was all about the future. The company's future, their future. Sola stood at the head of the table, her voice firm and resolute. "Today, we decide what kind of company we want to be. A company that values the work of its people, or a company that values only profits. A company that understands that success is not just measured by the bottom line, but by the dignity of every single worker. A company that rises or falls together." The board members sat in silence, their faces unreadable. Olenka shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable. He had not expected this. He had hoped the workers would tire, that they would grow complacent. But they hadn't. They had shown resilience, strength, and unity. "We are prepared to make the changes you want, Olenka Said," his voice tight. "But I want to make one thing clear. This company cannot survive without leadership. We cannot run this place like a democracy." Sola met his gaze. "Her eyes hard. We don't want a democracy. We want accountability. And we want fairness. If you want to lead, lead by example. Stop hiding behind your title. Ole, show us that you understand what it means to stand beside us, not above us." The tension in the room grew unbearable, but no one spoke. They all waited. The board was at a crossroads, and they had no choice but to make a decision. They could either accept the workers as partners, or risk losing everything they had built. Finally, Olenka stood up, his face pale. "Fine. We will make the changes. We will create a new structure, one where the workers will have a voice. But we will also require compromise. This cannot be an all-or-nothing decision." Sola nodded slowly. "Compromise is fine. But make no mistake, Olenka, this is not about giving us a token position. This is about real power, real change. If you're not willing to give that, then we walk away." The room held its breath. Olenka stood for a moment. Then, with a heavy sigh, he nodded. "Agreed. We will do what it takes. We will make this work." And with those words, the future of the company was set in motion. The news broke the next day. The company had agreed to give workers a voice in every decision, from wages to policies to leadership. The workers had gained a foothold, and the company had no choice but to accept them as equal partners. The victory was sweet, but it was also bittersweet. Sola knew that change would take time. It would take years to build the kind of company where workers were respected, where the balance of power wasn't tipped in favor of the rich. But this was a beginning. This was their first step towards something bigger. As Sola walked through the building that had once been her prison, now her workplace, she realized that everything had changed. The floors she had once cleaned were no longer the floors she walked alone. Now, they were the floors she walked with her people side by side. The price of change had been high, but in the end, It was worth it.